Welcome to a special forum in advance of the November 5th general election. This forum, a cooperative production of the Tallahassee Democrat and WFSU Public Media. Today we're talking about Constitutional Amendment number 3. That's adult personal use of marijuana, with representatives from both sides of the issue. I'm Tom Flanagan with WFSU Public Media. I am joined by Jim Rosica from the Tallahassee Democrat.
Thanks, Tom. Representing those against the amendment here on our panel today, we have Dr. Jessica Spencer. She is the Director of Advocacy for No on 3. Representing those in favor of Amendment 3 is Steve Vancore. He is a representative of Smart and Safe Florida. For those watching us on social media, please hit that share button and help all your friends see today's discussion too. For those at home, here's how the forums will work. We'll rotate which person gets to answer first. We will have a number of questions, so we will ask those on our panel to keep answers to right around 60 seconds, sometimes shorter for follow-ups. We will keep time. We do have a bell, which we will ding when your time is up. You don't have to come to a dead stop right then, but do finish your sentence and then we'll move on.
And if you're watching on Facebook and you have a question for our guests, go ahead, type them in the comments, and we will get to them just as many and as quickly as we possibly can, but time is limited. So your chances of having your question included in the proceedings will increase if you keep it brief and polite and make it a question that is applicable to all the folks who we have here on the panel. Do we have any questions before we start, folks? Well, then let's bounce right in on that first question. Jim?
And actually, we're going to start not with a question, but I'm going to ask each of our panelists just to informally introduce yourself once again and tell us who you are, how you got to be on this panel, and what your experience or expertise is with the question of marijuana that got you here today. Dr. Spencer, why don't we go ahead and start with you?
Fabulous. Thank you. And thank you for allowing us to be here to talk about this very important issue and topic here in the state. I have 24 years in the substance use prevention, intervention, and treatment field. This is obviously something that is very important to me. It is a passion project of mine, and getting people to understand as well constitutional amendments. I find them fascinating, and it's important to understand how substance use and amendments affect the Floridians here.
All right. Thank you very much. Now on to Steve Vancore.
Thank you, Jim. Steve Vancore. I've been involved with medical marijuana since its inception. I've been in and around the state since the 1980s, despite my youthful good looks, and working on constitutional amendments. And I have never been as passionate about one as I am about this, not because I am a person who consumes marijuana, but because I have seen the dangers of illegal street weed, what it's doing to our kids, what it's doing to our culture, and I think it's time to take it off the streets and put it into a safe, regulated market.
All right. Thank you, Steve. And that already takes care of one of our questions. Actually, to begin the questions, we will start first with Tom.
We will do something that you mentioned, Mr. Vancore, which is the experience of other states in this regard. And you get a whole minute and a half to respond on this one. What lessons can we learn, whether good or bad, from those other states that have already legalized the recreational use of marijuana?
Tom, that's a great question. Thank you. We can see good examples of bad examples. Let me give you two that stand out. California overtaxed it, handed out licenses like Pez dispensers, and what you see there is an increase in the illicit market, a decrease in legal sales. Also, it's very unregulated. I think you need to learn from that example. The other good example of a bad example is New York, which likewise overtaxed it. No surprise, California, New York, overtaxing things, and that made it economically feasible for the illicit market to continue to exist. The lessons we can learn are properly regulate it. We talk about what happened in Massachusetts where the labs, the independent labs, weren't quite so independent, so people were doing lab shopping. We need to strengthen the labs, make sure they're state certified so that what you're getting is what you know you're getting. Because what we're seeing more and more, and this isn't me saying it, for example, on August 21st of this year, the Attorney General issued a warning about more and more marijuana being laced with deadly drugs like fentanyl. 2 years ago, Tom, we had 3 people die in Gadsden County on the same day they were consuming marijuana. No matter where people stand on this, I think they can agree, that we can all agree, that smoking marijuana shouldn't be a death sentence, and nor, like the governor said, his words, no one should go to jail for smoking a joint. I agree on both of those things, and that's what Amendment 3 does.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Spencer, your take on that question too, please.
So certainly in other states that has legalized recreational marijuana, we see an increase in car crashes. We see increases on our social services, our emergency room visits, et cetera. There is no way to make marijuana safer. The idea and the concept of this safe and regulated market, it isn't working in other states. We are still seeing tremendous problems with the cannabis industry in other states that will undoubtedly affect Floridians here. And we need to look at the fact that this is a constitutional amendment, and although Mr. Vancore is referencing all of these regulations that would be in place, unfortunately we do not have proper mechanisms, which I'm sure we will get into later, for us to really take advantage of that with the language of this amendment.
While we're with you, Dr. Spencer, if we could do a follow-up here. For 1 minute response, please. What do you see as the long-term effects on society as a whole when it comes to legalizing recreational marijuana?
Well, I think we've seen it not only with the tobacco industry, but also with alcohol. I mean, legal substances and also prescription drugs, when we see legal substances that are intoxicating increased in our society, we are seeing increased youth use, despite what Mr. Vancore, I'm sure we'll try to talk about later, that we don't see that. We do see it. It sends a message to our youth that it's okay. We see increased alcohol use and tobacco use in areas that it's there, and it's the wrong message. We do not need to legalize another intoxicating substance when we are talking about our children and what is safe for them. Marijuana is not safe. We are not talking about the pot of yesteryear that's a very low potency. That's not at all what is on the table here. We're talking about high potency products that are also dangerous to young people's brains.
Okay, Mr. Vancore, your take, please, sir.
Yeah, Dr. Spencer and I agree on something, and we agree strongly. Intoxicating substances of all sorts, whether it's alcohol or marijuana, we should do everything we possibly can to keep it away from youth. When it comes to adults 21 and older, and keep in mind, the amendment only talks about 21 and older, but what we have seen in other states that have gone to recreational marijuana or legal marijuana market, and this isn't me saying it, by the way, this is the Center for Disease Control, this is SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Agency, and this is the independent, conservative Journal of the American Medical Association. They've all concluded by looking at the data that when you legalize marijuana, you reduce, I want to repeat that, you reduce teen usage. When you first hear that, you go, well, how can that be? Very simply, you take it off the street where it's easily accessible, and you put it into a regulated market where somebody has to walk into a store and show their ID. I promise you, the street corner drug dealer is not asking for an ID. That's why today, one of the examples is Colorado. Before 2011, 100% of the marijuana consumed was sold illegally. Today, 95% is sold in a regulated market.
Okay, thank you, sir.
What
Jim?
we do know, though, in states that have a reduction in youth use, if we actually see that, is they're still leveled off. It doesn't bring it to zero. So this concept and this idea of it will have youth use reduced, it doesn't happen. It just simply doesn't happen. And we would be combating that here in the state of Florida because the authors have indicated that it would triple the marijuana market here, which again, triples the ability for our youth to access it. Youth are drinking alcohol, and that's 21 and up.
Okay, but before we move on, Mr. Vancore, just can you cite any specific data points here showing a significant reduction in youthful use of marijuana in states that have legalized recreational marijuana.
Absolutely. 11% reduction in Colorado. And she's absolutely right. You will never do away with youth doing it. But I think we should all agree, and she agrees too, in the states that have moved to a recreational market, youth usage has gone down. I cited the Centers for Disease Control, which concluded that, SAMHSA, which concluded it, and the Journal of the American Medical Association, all found in states that went to recreational marijuana, did something like Amendment 3, youth usage went down. It's a move in the right direction. And what also happens is those who are using it, if they're getting it from a regulated market, it is safer. It doesn't contain things like fentanyl, ketamine, meth, which is what we see on a regular basis right now on street weed. You don't see that in a safer regulated market.
Very good. We're moving on to that, Jim. I think you have that.
I'm going to take the next question. And Steve Vancore, you spoke last, so I'll ask you to address this first. The question is, are you concerned about the potential health impacts of legalized recreational marijuana? If not, why not?
My focus first is on kids, and I'm concerned about the current market. I'm also concerned about what Dr. Ralph Masulo said in the Florida House of Representatives, that 90% of marijuana sold on the streets contains dangerous additives, dangerous chemicals like cadmium, lead, chlordane. It also contains the enhancers I just talked about, ketamine, meth, fentanyl. I'm concerned about people who are buying it on the streets. Right now, today in America, 1 in 6 adults say that they regularly use marijuana. It's probably higher because some people don't want to admit it. Instead of them having to break the law to get marijuana, let's have them go into a safer, regulated market where the marijuana is lab tested by an independent lab. Right now, today in Florida, the MMTCs that are operating have to send out their stuff to independent labs for testing, and the Department of Health does random checks to make sure it's safer. So am I concerned about someone smoking marijuana? It's safer than opioids. 200,000 people died last year from alcohol poisoning. 0 died from the effects of cannabis. I think that's an important statistic, Jim, and that's something I think Amendment 3 will help us make it safer for people to consume.
All right, Doc, go ahead.
So conversely, what's not being talked about is those individuals that are suffering from cannabis use disorder that have taken their lives while under the influence of marijuana, the increased mental health effects that we're seeing in other states from this safe and regulated market. There are major issues. We are not having a conversation about low potency THC marijuana, which I think when we look at the ballot's title and the ballot summary, I think most people could get on board with. Steve and I understand that. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about high potency products. We're talking about 35% THC in True Leaves on their website, 35% THC content in the raw herbal flower material. And then when we're looking at the vaping and we're looking at the oils, we're looking at 70 to 95% THC. That's a huge issue when we're looking at people's mental health, we're looking at health effects, et cetera. And the concept, again, of the safe and regulated market and all of these different things that we're hearing in different chemicals, et cetera, those same types of chemicals are being used in the processing at these manufacturers. So later on down the road, if we find out that one of those are bad for us, we have no recourse because the author specifically wrote in civil and criminal immunity for themselves as an industry, which would cover anything that we would find potentially harmful in their products.
All right, thank you very much. Tom, I'm going to throw it back to you.
Okay, this is a 1-minute response here, and Dr. Spencer, we'll start with you on this. Do you agree with concerns about marijuana being a gateway drug? If so, why? If not, why not?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in the field, I see that, obviously. Of course, I think it also needs to be stated, not everyone that uses marijuana uses other substances. So I think that's important. But I can tell you that 100% of the individuals that I saw in treatment did not start with harder drugs. They started with your alcohol, your tobacco, your prescription drugs, and your marijuana. Now, what's important about that is 3 of those that I just mentioned were legal substances. So we know that individuals start with these items, these substances, and move on to other things. It may not be everybody, but for the one that it is, that is a problem.
Okay, Mr. Vancore, your take?
I agree with Dr. Spencer's observation. Obviously, she's a clinician. She knows what she's talking about on that. But I also agree that if we can get it off the streets where it does contain, it will not contain. In the regulated market, it is lab tested to make sure the only thing you're buying is marijuana and not laced with ketamine, not laced with PCP, not laced with fentanyl. But what you look at here is, where is it a gateway drug? It's a gateway drug among teens, right? And she's right. Some start tobacco, some start with alcohol, some start with marijuana, some start with other things, right? But let's work to make it less accessible to those teens so it doesn't become a gateway drug. We take it off the streets, we take it out of their hands, we don't make it so accessible. But let me tell you what else is a gateway problem. In order to consume marijuana as an adult, a young adult, an old adult, you have to first break the law. That's a gateway into law breaking, and that's something we want to stop. Say, let's regulate it. Tom, if you choose to smoke, you don't have to break the law in order to do so, and now you're more likely to be a responsible adult in consuming it.
Okay,
and so if we're talking about teenagers aren't able to purchase the product, so they would already be breaking the law because you have to be 21 and up to do so.
Okay, Jim.
All right, thank you. Next question is going to be one of those ripped from the headlines questions. Politico Florida today is reporting that State Surgeon General Joseph Ladapo is telling doctors to place pediatric patients on routine drug screening programs because he is concerned about the rise in use by kids of marijuana. Obviously, this comes 2 weeks before the election. Do you agree or disagree with the doctor, and why? Dr. Spencer, I'll ask you to go first on this one.
And Jessica's totally fine. I think in certain areas that may be appropriate. I think that will send me down an avenue to try to figure out, well, how much is that costing individuals? I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea. Maybe if you're looking at athletes, and you don't want them using substances and then being sick on the field. I agree with it, and then I wonder how it's going to be implemented.
All right. Steve Vancore.
I agree with both Dr. Spencer and Dr. Ladapo. I drug tested my children when they were younger to make sure. And I think if parents feel that that's necessary, if they suspect their child, their teenager of engaging in either alcohol or tobacco or THC products, they should take that responsibility. So I agree. Anything we can do to protect kids and keep them off of any intoxicating substances is a good thing.
And as a quick follow-up, should we also, based on that then, should we also be making our kids perform breathalyzer tests?
That's up to the parent. And if a parent suspects a teenager is drinking, absolutely. If that's a tool that a parent can use to help keep their kids on the straight path, I think it's a really good idea.
Jessica Spencer, what do you think?
I think I agree with Steve with the whole parent piece, and I took the question as they were trying to institute it like across the board in a school, and perhaps I heard you incorrectly. But yeah, I mean, I would agree with random drug testing if it's your child. I mean, to that point, I think that, like you said, it's responsible parenting. I don't know if it has a place in our school systems. Perhaps it does, but I guess I would need to know more about that because, well, then what? Are they then funding treatment? What are they doing? So I don't entirely understand the question.
I'll send you the article, but my quick read of it was that he's asking doctors to test their underage patients for marijuana use specifically as a part of treatment, as a part of a visit. But we'll read that whole story.
Jim, you know who you don't have to test? You don't have to test a kid who's overdosed on fentanyl.
Fair enough. Tom, go right ahead.
But they do to see if there is polysubstance use happening.
That's right.
Well, now that you bring up the topic, Steve, is fentanyl-laced marijuana a real issue in Florida? I say that because some officials on the front lines of the epidemic have not seen deaths, according to a recent story in the Orlando Sentinel, and some groups are calling it a myth. You got a minute?
I absolutely do. I read the story, and I worked with Scholar Swisher on that story. He just got it wrong. There was an arrest about a month and a half ago in Putnam County. A guy had a whole truckload, trunkload of marijuana laced with fentanyl. The 3 people up in Gadsden County and talking to Sheriff Morris Young that died while smoking marijuana, tell those 3 families, one of whom is a brother of a friend of mine, tell them it's a myth. But lastly, on August 21st, I mentioned this earlier, our own Attorney General, who's very much opposed to Amendment 3, issued a warning that she, in her office, this is the chief law enforcement of the state of Florida, issued a warning that more and more marijuana is being found laced with fentanyl. It's very real, Tom. And again, we had 3 deaths right up the block from this studio as a direct result of marijuana laced with fentanyl. They thought it was meth, but it was what's called a hot batch, and it had fentanyl in it, and they overdosed.
Okay, thank you. Jessica Spencer.
I believe it's a fallacy. I believe it's fear-mongering. The data that I've seen does not support that. In fact, so far as to say, just several weeks ago, Mr. Vancore said it was actually 6 people. Now it's 3. I don't know what we want to believe. I do not see any data that says that there is marijuana-laced or fentanyl-laced marijuana here in our state. In fact, I would actually ask everyone to please read the latest Lancet article that indicates that this is not an issue. What we're looking at that point is polysubstance use. So it is fear-mongering yet again to put this false narrative out there that it's going to be safe and regulated if it comes from this industry versus purchasing on the street. Legalization does nothing to do away with our black market. We see it in every single solitary state that has legalized recreational marijuana, and we also see a high incidence of polysubstance use.
May I answer that? May I respond to that?
30 seconds. Go ahead,
in
Steve.
Colorado is a good example that they like to use as a bad example. In 2011, 100% of the marijuana sold on the streets was sold illegally. Anybody consuming it in Colorado then was buying it illegally. Today, 95% is sold through a safe, regulated market. And it wasn't me issuing the warning. It was the Attorney General issuing the warning. It wasn't me who said 90% of weed confiscated in the street has dangerous additives. It was Dr. Ralph Masulo in testifying against issues related to Amendment 3.
Okay.
If you're selling substances on the street, isn't it inherently 100% of the time it's being sold illegally? So that doesn't make any sense at all.
All right,
whatsoever.
thank you. We are running behind schedule, so we're going to move on. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to questions about marijuana and crime. Very directly, will marijuana legalization increase or decrease crime in your view? Jessica Spencer, go first.
I think it increases it from the sense that we don't do away with the black market. This is not how you effectively do away with the black market of selling substances. There is this narrative that's going around about decriminalization. This is not the way to decriminalize marijuana here in our state. Do we need to talk about justice reform? I think Steve and I absolutely, get on board about that. We absolutely need to talk about justice reform. This amendment does not do that. This does not decriminalize marijuana and marijuana charges in the sense that I believe Floridians are looking at and are confused by at this point. I also want to mention that there is not nearly this huge number of individuals that are being arrested for simple marijuana possession. It does not happen. They have multiple other charges. Our law enforcement is not rolling around town trying to write someone up or put someone in jail over simple marijuana possession. It doesn't happen. It is coupled with other charges. It could also be a VPO. It could be, or VOP rather. It could be a multitude of things versus simple marijuana possession.
Steve Vancore.
22% of arrests on the streets are for simple possession, but it will absolutely reduce crime. For starters, it will reduce that 22% of arrests out of the box. But secondly, the data clearly shows, unequivocally, domestic violence goes down, and in states where gang violence related to drug selling also goes down. I don't know of a single state except California and New York where crime went up. There's 24 states plus Washington, D.C. that have legalized it. And in every one of those, except those 2, we could talk about that if you like, the crime rate has gone down related to marijuana, of course, because now it's no longer illegal. But when you see things like domestic violence go down, gang violence go down, why? Why does gang violence go down? Because you're taking it off the streets where the gangs are fighting over market share. You're taking it off, you're putting it in a safe, regulated market where products are tested, and adults can go in and purchase for their own limits and a limited amount, only 3 ounces.
What I find interesting is that we're now hearing 22%. In a lot of these debates, I'm hearing different percentages and different numbers are being thrown out about people that are being arrested for simple possession of marijuana. In none of those, I'm hearing any delineation between how old someone was, if they were over 21 or not, if there were other charges, which there would be, not just simple marijuana possession. So we're throwing out these numbers, but we're not providing the backup for it. None of them have been broken down. I haven't seen one single CRA, a criminal report affidavit, that would tell me what the actual charges were and that, or if it was a simple possession charge. I have seen no information from a state attorney's office, and I've seen no case numbers to verify and back up this 22%, or as another individual says, 16,000, which is actually 0.0072 of the populace of Florida.
Doc, I got to put a pin in it right there because we got to go back to Tom.
And we also have actually a follow-up to something you just said, Jessica, here. What are the social justice implications of legalizing recreational marijuana, especially with regard to past criminal convictions for marijuana-related offenses? How does that all play in together?
I don't see where there's any language in the amendment that would allow someone to expunge or whatever. However, if we're talking about simple marijuana possession, that actually is a misdemeanor that you could already go and have either expunged or removed from your record.
Okay, Steve Vancore.
Yeah, when you're passing a citizen initiative, you're only allowed to cover one very narrow subject at a time. Do we wish we could have put in there expungement, some of the social justice issues? Absolutely. You got to take these things one step at a time. Once you legalize it for adults, and that's exactly what you're doing, you're saying adults can possess limited quantities safely purchased from a regulated market. As a result of that, you will see the good things that follow from that, right? So you're dealing with an issue, you know, whether it's reduction in crime, safer marijuana on the streets, reduction in teen use, all of those things kind of travel together.
All right.
All right, thank you very much. I guess it's back to me. I'm going to ask, what regulations should be put in place if recreational marijuana is legalized for adults? Steve, go ahead and take this one first. You have 1:30.
Well, for starters, we should regulate what's known as time, place, and manner restrictions. There's already been a bill submitted by former Republican chair and now sitting state senator Joe Gruters to make sure we don't smell it everywhere. The legislative intent is clearly articulated in the amendment to give the legislature the full authority. It actually wasn't even necessary, in my opinion, to put it in there because the legislature already has what's known as plenary authority to enact following legislation. But the language makes it clear that one of the things we can do, we can put in place regulations to make sure people aren't smoking it near schools. They're not smoking it at stadiums. They're not smoking it at beaches. They're not smoking it in public places where you smell it, just like we do for tobacco. The other thing I think that's going to be critical is to make sure we do in the recreational market, just like we're doing in the medical market, to have state-certified labs overseen by the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services to make sure every product that's being sold is independently lab tested to make sure it only contains the products which say it's in there, and you get to see the dosage limits at all. Because Jessica's absolutely right. Marijuana is stronger than it used to be in the 60s and the 70s, of course. So that's why labeling is so vital, so people know what they're consuming.
All right, Jessica Spencer, I'll ask you, I would ask you to answer, but my concern is that you think the question is moot, because it's my impression that the folks who are opposed to this amendment think that the amendment doesn't allow for any room to regulate. Maybe you can expand on that.
It's not that we think it, it's a fact.
Okay.
So when we talk about plenary authority of our legislature, they can only write laws, whether it be the implementing bill or subsequent bills, that are consistent with the language of the amendment. In fact, it says that are consistent with the language of the amendment. The issue with the public smoking is all the authors needed to do was cross out one word, medical, and it has nothing to do with single subject because they crossed the word medical out at the beginning. They didn't cross the word medical out. So that actually ties the hands of our legislature, which, yes, there is a senator that already indicates he's going to write that bill. And yet there's another senator who actually said, sorry, you can't do that, who's a lawyer and understands how constitutional amendments work, said you can't do that. Then our governor, who is a lawyer, said you can't do that. So the idea of plenary authority sounds great, but you can only enact laws that are consistent with the language of the amendment. So It is a fact, and it is moot in that sense because we are not going to be able to restrict and regulate. And the fact that we're talking about, oh, well, what we can do with our products and the packaging, you can't. Because in the amendment, it doesn't say anything about regulating the packaging of recreational products. It doesn't say anything about the THC content of recreational products. It only references the medical marijuana industry.
All right, let's leave the question of regulation aside then, and I'll ask this as a follow-up. Do you think that there should be any sort of public education campaign put in place if this amendment passes? I guess, Steve, I'll start with you. 1 minute.
Yes.
What would that campaign look like?
Well, I think educating consumers to the dangers of overconsumption, whether it's tobacco, alcohol, or marijuana, would probably be a good thing. But more importantly, we're supposed to be the freedom state, to allow adults something that over half of America already is allowed to have the freedom to consume for their own personal consumption. But I think, and again, I think Dr. Spencer would agree if this were to pass, and I think it will, that we educate children to the dangers of using any type of intoxicating substance. I think that would be an excellent use of the money that will be generated when we go to legal sales.
All right, Jessica Spencer.
Absolutely. There needs to be an education platform. I think we're already looking at a strained system, though, and a strained economic system. And when we talk about taxes that would be generated, we can look at Colorado. We look at $1 in tax revenue actually goes out the window because there's $4.50 in social costs. So they're actually operating at a deficit. Do I believe there should be public education? There absolutely should. But I also don't believe that we need to legalize another intoxicating substance and send the wrong message straight out the gate to our youth that this is okay without having something in place. And although we may want the tax revenue to go to public education, we don't know that it will because there is nothing outlined, as it has been in other states, where the tax money should go.
All right, Tom.
Jim, can I respond to that? Because this is an important question. Because
Steve,
it wasn't
take 20
us
seconds.
who says it's $400 million a year to the state. It was the governor's office that says it will generate over $400 million a year for the state. They had the opportunity to consider what Dr. Spencer is talking about, and they said it's at least $400 million for the state of Florida. That was their call, not my call.
Okay, Tom.
All right. Well, that piggybacks then into the entire economics of the situation. And Steve, sticking with you here, when you look at the language of the amendment itself, there actually is, at the very tail end, an explanation of what the economic impact may be.
Right.
And beyond that, though, when you get into what Dr. Spencer was talking about, the social costs, what is that trade-off between potential revenues coming in and the social costs of the amendment going out?
Well, first of all, I think the social costs are positive, but neither Dr. Spencer nor I are economists. The chief economist of the state, who does work for and report to the governor, she's the one who led the team to evaluate this, including places like Colorado, California, and other folks who have made mistakes in enacting this. It was their number that they put on it, said at least about $400 million a year, $200 million the first year, up to $400 million a year that the legislature can spend as they want. We would have liked to have directed that money, by the way, but the court said you cannot do that if you want to pass single subject. So I think, A, the social benefits, reduction in domestic violence, reduction in teen use, reduction in auto insurance rates, all those things are positive things, and it was their agency, not me, who said it'll be a net positive of $400 million a year to the state of Florida. It wasn't my number. It was the chief economist for the state of Florida under the governor.
Okay.
All they're required to do is give the estimate of what the number would actually be. They don't take into account the social costs. And I've spoken to people from Colorado, and their car insurance is not cheap. It actually was less expensive to come here to Florida, which I found shocking because my insurance is pretty darn expensive. We see an increase on social services in that there are increased crashes. There is a drain on our social service because people do overdose on marijuana. You don't have to die to overdose. They are showing up in the emergency rooms. It puts a strain on our law enforcement because now you need to hire DREs. You need to do all of these different things. So although, yes, there may be this impact panel that has this dollar amount, they don't look at what the social costs are. They're just looking at the number that could be the revenue that could be generated. But as I said, Colorado, they see for every dollar generated, $4.50 goes out. And that's the piece that we're missing, and that's not being talked about.
Dr. Spencer, I just have to correct you. I sat in on those meetings. They absolutely considered the social costs. They had people come and present these very things, and they considered all of that in their evaluation. I watched it I sat in a room or I watched it. They absolutely 100% considered all of those things.
And what was the breakdown?
They said $400 million net revenue to the state of Florida. Is their number, not mine.
We respectfully disagree.
All right, let me ask, we kind of just touched on this, I'll ask it more directly. Do you think marijuana will or should be taxed, and how should the taxed revenue be used specifically if the amendment is approved? Actually, Jessica Spencer, I'm going to start with you on this one. 1 minute.
I mean, this would be more of a Jessica answer than a campaign answer, and I think Steve already hit it on it. My background is in substance abuse prevention and education and treatment, so obviously I would imagine and I would hope, as in other states, that tax revenue went to treatment. And I think Steve brought up a really good point about education programs as well. So that's where I would hope it would go. But again, it's a guessing game. Steve and I, he said that too. Steve and I both can't say where it would go. We have to leave it up to the legislature. And I don't think that's a good plan for Florida.
Steve Vancore, go ahead.
Not a very good debate if we're agreeing so much, is
Right.
it? The tax revenue would be up to the legislature where it would go. And so we would hope that they would put it into these kinds of programs that would benefit Floridians, and we don't play the game with the lottery. But remember, if you're talking about taxing, here's what's really critical about this. The key mistake that was made in California and New York, shock, they overtaxed it. And what happened was you changed the economic formula where it's easier to say, well, I don't want to pay so much, I'm going to go buy it on the street. You want to tax it so you generate those revenues, but you don't want to overtax it so you drive people back to the illicit market. That's why, and Jessica's correct, the illicit market grew in California, it grew in New York, and part of the reason, it's more complicated than that, but part of the reason they overtaxed it. So I would hope the legislature would show some restraint and recognize if you overtax it, you keep the illegal market very robust. And that should be one of the key goals, is to reduce, not increase, the illegal market.
All right, thank you both. Tom?
You're welcome.
All right, that is very close to something we're going to talk about next, and that is how would legalization affect young people, that is, those in the teenage years? Would legalization make marijuana more accessible or harder to get for them? A minute and a half, Steve.
Well, clearly the data shows you take it off the street. I used Colorado. We keep using Colorado as examples. But before it was legal, 100% was sold on the streets. People are selling it near schools, selling it near churches, selling it in back alleys. Now 95% of the sales are through a legal regulated market. The data is crystal clear. This is the Centers for Disease Control. This is SAMHSA, the federal agency that monitors substance abuse, and the Independent Journal for the American Medical Association, and a few others, but that's the big three, have all said when you take it off the street, you make it less accessible, it's not as easy to buy, and therefore teen usage goes down, not up.
Okay, Jessica Spencer.
I think we're going to disagree. So we're good. We're in a good place there. So no, I don't agree with what he's saying at all. We see increased teen use. We see increased use. It's a very simple formula, and it can apply to anything in our lives. You increase access, you increase availability, you increase use. And by increasing access is just the fact that these are going to be all over the place. You can read the Florida Trend article that talks about this will be a $6 billion industry. They're going to triple the market. You're increasing access for the mere fact that that is how much more is in our state. You're increasing availability because we will see more and more of these shops. They say they're going to be like the next Walmart and CVS on every corner. We're sending a message to our youth that it's okay. It's the same reason we are concerned when we see the alcohol outlets and the tobacco outlets. We are going to see a boom, huge market here in our state, and it sends the wrong message to adolescents and youth. Again, we have legal intoxicating substances, and them being legal doesn't stop them from using it.
May I respond to that?
Quick
$6
rebuttal there,
billion
20
market,
seconds.
she's correct. That $6 billion market, however, already exists in the illegal trades. All you're simply doing in that regard is taking it off the streets of that $6 billion market and moving it into a safe, regulated environment where you can tax it, you can protect against children getting access to it. And so the $6 billion market's already there. Let's just move it inside.
Okay, I want to pick up on something that Jessica Spencer just said, which is, in a sense, if this ballot question passes, the industry that you represent, Steve Vancore, is now going to, I think some would argue, compete with the alcohol and tobacco industry. I'm wondering if you have spoken to those concerns. Are they concerned about, if this amendment passes, that you will be an entrant into that industry and another competitor? Have you had any discussions? Has anyone come to you with any concerns?
Well, I have had discussions, but nobody's brought concerns, because what you do see in regulated markets is a slight decline in alcohol consumption, which also correlates to the same decline in domestic violence, because we all have known somebody who, when they drink, they get a little violent, they get aggressive, they get angry. Nobody knows anybody who gets high and does that. And so you see reduction in domestic violence, for example. But no, and you're already seeing some of that in the craft market. The craft beer market is starting to wane a little bit, and part of the reason is people are shifting to CBD products. Frankly, I think that's a good thing, because the World Health Organization, the CDC, and other organizations have clearly stated alcohol is a dangerous substance. People do die. 200 million people die. 200,000 people a year die from alcohol-related death, 0 from marijuana-related death. So is it a bad thing if they're going to be smoking a joint in their home versus drinking a few beers? I'll leave that up to the individual, but the really thing that's important here is you're giving people that choice, and they don't have to break the law to have one choice, which they're already doing, versus another choice.
Jessica Spencer, I see you shaking your head. Do you agree with the premise of the question?
I don't agree with the answer, because, and I don't want to go too far down this field, because again, we're talking about a constitutional amendment, but he's absolutely incorrect when we say there are 0 deaths that are marijuana related. There are plenty, and there are plenty of families that have suffered the loss of a family member that in a cannabis-induced psychosis got into some sort of trouble or committed suicide, et cetera. Or in fact, and I remember years ago, Christine Kirk, in a medical marijuana market, she died at the hands of her husband. So that's a fallacy. That's simply not true. We do see this happen. But again, I don't want to go too far upstream and be too far away from the issue of, we are looking at a constitutional amendment. So whether we're talking about the merits of legalizing an intoxicating substance, we need to actually look at the format in which it is being presented to us and make an informed, educated decision from that perspective, and not get too far upstream. And then Steve and I, we will disagree with things. We need to focus on that we are talking about a constitutional amendment, and it is written poorly, and it has too many things that are bad for our state.
All right, thank you. Tom?
Okay, one last youth and marijuana question, if we could here, starting with you, Jessica, please. Since you indicated that there seems to be, in your estimation, a higher incidence of young people partaking of marijuana in states that have legalized recreational weed, what additional guardrails or restrictions do you think should be put in place legally to mitigate that impact?
Well, it almost doesn't matter what I think, because we wouldn't be able to do so based on the language of the amendment. We could talk about the age. We could talk about the outlets and where they're located. We could talk about what type of tools they're using for marketing. We don't have the ability to do that here. There's nothing in the language here that references recreational marijuana when it relates to packaging, when it relates to the types of products that are there, whether it relates to cartoon characters, et cetera. There's nothing in here. And again, we talk about plenary authority. Our legislature can only put guardrails in place that are consistent with the language of the amendment. And the fact that they don't have it written in here to allow our legislature to put in those guardrails to protect our youth is in and of itself a problem, and we wouldn't be able to legislate our way into those regulations.
Steve Vancore.
We're just going to disagree on this, and I've probably listened to way too many lawyers on this. This is tucked up under the medical marijuana statutes, under the medical marijuana part of the Constitution. And when you ask what should we do to protect against youth, we should do exactly what we're already doing in the medical field, which is opaque windows so you can't look inside, opaque packaging, child-proof containers, clearly labeled. Remember, the outside of the box has to be clearly labeled with THC. The inside of the box has to be clearly labeled with THC. We have limits on the milligrams, and each product is also labeled with THC, so there's no mistaking what it is. And what the fear that Dr. Spencer articulated when she was opposing the medical marijuana amendment never came true. We don't see an increase in youth usage. You will not see that. You will see, when you say I disagree that teen usage would go down. That's not me saying it. Those are independent peer-reviewed journals that have looked at this data, and they've concluded, not me, they've concluded that teen usage goes down because they put in place the same regulations we have under the medical marijuana statutes in the state of Florida already.
They don't want you to read the language because it regulates the medical marijuana market. It does not say one word about recreational, so it can be tucked wherever you want it tucked. It doesn't reference recreational, so therefore it would be in direct opposition. It would not be consistent with the language of the amendment. Period. That's how plenary authority works. That's how implementing bills are written. That's how subsequent bills are written when we're looking at a constitutional
All
amendment.
right, we're going to change the format a bit now. Well, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to read a quote to you each, a different quote. Then I'm going to ask you to respond. The other person will have a chance to rebut the response as it were. Mr. Vancore, you're first. This is an excerpt from Governor DeSantis's appearance on last night's Ingraham angle on Fox News. He said, Amendment 3 is being bankrolled by one big weed company. He did not name that company. They're not doing it because they care about the best interests of Florida. They're doing it because they want to make profits. They're saying you have a right to possess and smoke it, but only if you buy it from them, because they're actually setting up a cartel in the Constitution of Florida. So if you want to grow your own marijuana, that is not in the amendment, end quote. Mr. Vancore, your response to that.
The statement is provably false. Right now, Florida has 25 medical marijuana licenses operating in the state. That's more than we have grocery store chains. And the governor himself is sitting on another 22, announced in April of 2023 that they were going to issue another 22 licenses. That would be 47 sellers. But Jim, let me read you the ballot language itself so you can see it for yourself. The legislature may provide for the licensure of entities that are not medical marijuana treatment centers. So if you want to make this case that they're doing it for their own good, they're actually creating a more competitive market and giving the legislature the clear authority to give more licenses for different things, like, to quote, to cultivate, acquire, possess, process, transfer, sell. That includes individuals if they want to grow. An individual could be a licensee, could be an entity that could cultivate their own. It's simply not true that this protects and preserves a cartel, which, by the way, a cartel is illegal. They're not illegal. They were signed into law by a person named Ron DeSantis.
Jessica Spencer, totally optional. Do you want to rebut?
Yes.
Okay.
His client has braggadociously said in a Florida Trend article that this would be historic for this industry. They have talked about that this will be Walmart and CVS in every corner. This is absolutely about this industry. You do not spend over $100 million creating a backyard competitor. You do it to create a consumer. And it is very important to understand that words matter, because they use the word cultivate when talking about themselves and being able to grow. They didn't use it when they were talking about individuals. And so to say that we're going to tuck it in under and we're going to have it as an individual entity because we're sitting on all of these licenses, that's a fallacy. The bottom line is they did this for themselves. This is about corporate greed, and follow the money to figure it out.
All right.
And listen to their quotes in the Florida Trend article.
All right. Thank you, Jessica Spencer. Now I'm going to ask you to respond to a quote. This is an excerpt from Florida attorney and marijuana advocate John Morgan. This was taken from an appearance on WKMG News 6, also known as Click Orlando. This was posted yesterday on YouTube. He said, Tallahassee is broken for us. They don't want us to have any say in what we want. So when I look at marijuana, I look at the history of ruined lives. It, referring to criminalization, disproportionately discriminates against people of color and the poor. It was a plant put into nature by God for us, and it works. There's no domestic violence with marijuana. There's a lot of domestic violence with wild turkey, tequila, and everything else. So what I say to these people like Ron DeSantis is, stay out of our lives. Go ahead and respond to that.
It's pretty typical, Mr. Morgan. I mean, we're talking again about issues that aren't relevant to the issue at hand. Talk about justice reform. Absolutely, let's do it. We need to do that. We need to have those conversations. This amendment doesn't fix that. And when he's talking about ruining lives, what he's often referencing, and every time I have been with him, is he's referencing people's criminal history and how they can't get into college and they can't get into the military, et cetera. This wouldn't fix that. This wouldn't fix that. We're looking at 21 and up. Those individuals are under the age of 21. This does not fix our criminal justice and justice reform that he's referencing. And again, it's a fallacy and it's fear-mongering on that side about what the truth is about individuals that are dealing with real problems in their neighborhoods. And let's look at the neighborhoods that are being targeted with this industry and where they're actually located in other states. They are in those communities that we are concerned with, and we want to make sure there is fair and equitable treatment of everyone in our communities.
The father of
Vancore, do you want
marijuana
to rebut?
reform in Florida is a guy named Michael Minardi, who is a criminal defense lawyer. I asked him what percentage of his cases are for simple possession, and he said between 30 and 40%. The question was asked in an earlier forum today of Sheriff Smith of Bradford County. Does he have anybody in his jail? Difference between jail and prison, because I agree with the governor. Nobody's in prison, which is a long-term stay, for simple possession. But he said he absolutely 100% has people sitting in his jail today for simple possession. And you're right, Jim, and John was right as well. It's disproportionately targeted towards people of color, and that needs to stop. And this will not fix all of that. And if anybody says we're saying that, we're not. We will not completely get rid of the illicit market. It will not bring teen usage to zero. It will not rectify some of the past injustices and the war on drugs, but it's a great first step in saying we'll no longer have some of that disparity when it comes to simple possession. That's simple. Wish we could do more, but we were limited to one very narrow subject.
Okay, before Tom goes into the lightning round, I'm going to suggest that we postpone the lightning round because I'm catching a typo in there that I need to fix. So I'm going to ask Tom to go into the section called Question for the Other Side.
Yes, and let's keep these as pithy as we can. Only a few minutes remaining in our forum today, folks. So what is one question, Steve, you'd like to ask Jessica? You get a minute 30 for that, please.
When we pass this, will you work with us to make sure we put those safeguard rails in place?
I mean, I genuinely like you, so
Same here.
I think and that's why we're matching today. I think I would love to work with you, but unfortunately, this amendment's not going to pass because it's not good for our state, and it's a constitutional amendment we need to have fixed prior to that.
All right, so we toss the ball back on the other side of the court. What's one question you'd like to ask Steve, Jessica?
I don't even have a question for Steve, so I don't know if it has to be related to the issue or not. So no, I'm actually going to pass. I don't have a question for him.
Okay, all right.
All right, very good. I'm going to check the time, and I see that we have time for maybe one or two more questions. I'm going to ask this. Do you have a personal anecdote about marijuana that helps shape your opinion on this issue? Do you have a personal anecdote on marijuana that helped shape your opinion on the issue? I'm going to ask Jessica, you spoke last, so you'll speak first on this when you have 1 minute.
I think I do. So, well, I know I do. I have several, which it's hard because I have a 24-year career in this. But I think what's more concerning for me, again, is that it's a constitutional amendment. But I go back to my days working in youth detox and adult detox. I didn't think there was necessarily an issue with the potency of marijuana at the time, or actually, rather I did, in the sense that I had people still come in and stay in detox. At the time, we sent them to the street. Now that I'm seeing highly potent marijuana products, we are seeing more and more individuals that need to be detoxed, and sometimes it's several days. So for me, I'm very concerned about this product. And again, to answer Mr. Morgan's statement as well, it's from the earth. Well, it was from the earth however many hundreds of thousands of years ago. Now we're genetically engineering and we're messing with this plant, and it's highly potent. So for me, anecdotally, I'm very concerned about the potency of these products and the message that that's sending to everybody in the state of Florida.
Steve Vancore, you're next.
A little over 2 years ago, I was working with Sheriff Morris Young of Gadsden County to develop messaging to warn people about the dangers of marijuana laced with fentanyl. That was hard to hear him and talk about the families. But what really hit home for me, Jim, was when a close friend of mine called me to tell me one of the people who died that day from smoking marijuana was his brother. And it was 3. There was 9 total that died that day. 3 of them were smoking marijuana. So yeah, that recommitted me to saying, we got to get this stuff off the street where it is being laced with dangerous chemicals and put it into a safe market where it can be independently lab tested so that you get what you think you're getting. You know, when we did this 100 years ago for liquor and beer and wine and spirits, we did it because people were running moonshine and people were dying as a direct result of wood alcohol. They were going blind from illegal, improper additives. We've taken it off the streets. I don't drink, but I respect, if you want to, at least you're buying it, you're of age, it's a choice you're allowed to make, and you know there's no dangerous chemicals added to it other than what you're being told.
Folks, closing arguments. Steve Vancore, let's start with you. You get a minute to make your case, please.
For closing argument, I think we can all agree on 2 things. The first thing is that smoking marijuana is something 1 in 6 Americans already do, but they have to engage in criminal activity to do that. We should agree that that shouldn't be a death sentence or playing Russian roulette with your life. The second thing, also quoting the governor again, no one should go to jail for smoking a joint. I also think no one should go to jail for simply possessing a limited amount of marijuana that was bought through a legal channel. If you take those 2 things, at the end of the day, wipe away everything else, what you're hearing from both sides. That's essentially what Amendment 3 does. And I would urge everybody watching this to please vote yes and get this stuff off the streets and away from our kids.
Dr. Jessica Spencer, your turn.
Thank you again for having us. I'm going to miss Steve when all of this is over. I think what I would want the viewers to definitely pay attention to is that this is a constitutional amendment, and I think Steve brings up a really good point. You don't have to listen to either one of us about it. You just really have to read the amendment and understand what this is truly about. Words matter that are there, and words matter that aren't there, and we need to pay very, very clear attention to civil and criminal immunity for this industry that we already know has problematic additives, has problematic things within their marketing strategies and also with their manufacturing. We also need to understand that our legislature cannot fix the issues that the other side has already admitted by saying they would put bills out there. We are not here to fix their problems. We are here to vote no on this amendment because it would forever be enshrined in our state constitution as is written as the language that we are looking at. So I urge everyone to please read and understand what this means for our state and please vote no.
All right. Thank you to our guests today. Jessica Spencer, Director of Advocacy for No on 3, and Steve Vancore, representing Smart and Safe Florida. We also want to thank our audiences for joining us for this forum. And, of course, thank you to WFSU and the Tallahassee Democrat for putting this together.
And you can find a replay of the forum on our YouTube pages, Tallahassee.com, as well as WFSU.com. The recorded broadcast will air on Tuesday, October 29th at 11 a.m. on WFSU FM. That's 88.9. So please tell your friends.
And remember, early voting is going on now in Leon County. Of course, Election Day is November 5th. And look for our special election section of the Tallahassee Democrat. It's got interviews with all the candidates on the ballots, on the local ballots, and it is available on Tallahassee.com. So for now, for FSU and the Tallahassee Democrat, thanks for joining us. Have a great day.